My son invoiced me a bill of $1,800 for Thanksgiving dinner. I'm Jim Thompson, and 48 hours after writing my son Brandon an $85,000 check to save his failing investment firm, he handed me a bill for eating turkey at his own house. The itemized invoice included everything: turkey, wine markup, even a 20% gratuity charged to his own father, like I was some random customer instead of the man who raised him alone after his mother died. Like the person who sacrificed everything to put him through Harvard was now expected to pay premium rates for the privilege of a family dinner. I held that invoice and realized my son saw me as nothing more than a walking ATM with legs. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're from. I'd love to hear from anyone who's ever been treated like a stranger by their own family, because sometimes the people who charge you for love are living in houses you own, and when that truth comes out, the bill comes due in ways they never expected. Let me back up and tell you how we got here. My son Brandon is 31, Harvard MBA, works at some fancy investment firm in Manhattan, makes good money, lives in Greenwich, Connecticut, in one of those colonial mansions with the circular driveways and the perfectly manicured lawns. His wife Vera comes from what they call old money. Her family's been in Connecticut since before the Revolutionary War. They summer in the Hamptons, winter in Aspen, and apparently think a man who works with his hands is somewhere between a servant and a curiosity. I've been getting the message for years, but it took me a while to admit what I was seeing. It started small. Family photos on Brandon's social media. I'm never in them. Christmas cards to his colleagues. No mention of dear old Dad. When Vera's friends visit, I'm introduced as the handyman who helps around the property. The handyman, like I'm on payroll. But the real wake-up call came at their wedding 3 years ago. Beautiful ceremony. No expense spared. 200 guests at the Greenwich Hills Country Club. I wore my best suit, the Brooks Brothers one I bought specifically for the occasion. During the reception, I overheard Brandon talking to Vera's Uncle Charles. "Dad's doing well in his consulting business," Brandon was saying. "Retired from corporate management a few years back. Consulting business. Corporate management. I've been a plumber for 35 years. Built Thompson Plumbing from nothing, one pipe at a time. There's no shame in honest work, but apparently there's shame in admitting it." I confronted Brandon the next morning. "Since when am I a corporate consultant?" He got that look, part embarrassment, part irritation. "Dad, these people don't understand blue-collar work. It's easier this way." Easier for whom? I wondered. The pattern escalated from there. Brandon started borrowing money. Always a crisis, always urgent. $20,000 for a down payment when his bonus was delayed, $15,000 when Vera's gallery hit a rough patch, $35,000 when his firm had cash flow issues. I always said yes. What father wouldn't help his son? But the requests came with conditions. Don't mention the loans to Vera. Don't call during business hours. Don't show up at his office unannounced. It might confuse his colleagues about his family background. The truth was becoming clear. Brandon wasn't just ashamed of what I did for a living. He was ashamed of me. The breaking point should have been last Christmas. Vera's parents were hosting dinner at their estate, a massive stone mansion that screams old Connecticut money. Brandon pulled me aside beforehand. "Just try to fit in tonight, okay, Dad? Maybe don't mention the plumbing thing unless someone asks directly." I bit my tongue. I always bit my tongue. At dinner, Calantha Pemberton, Vera's mother, made polite conversation. "Jim, Brandon tells me you're in property management now?" Property management. That was a new one. "Something like that," I said, while Brandon shot me a grateful look. The evening went smoothly. I played my part, talked about the weather, complimented the wine, asked appropriate questions about their recent trip to Tuscany. But as I drove home that night, something hardened inside me. I realized I was enabling this charade. Every time I stayed quiet, every time I played along with Brandon's version of reality, I was telling him that what I'd done with my life, what I'd sacrificed for his opportunities, wasn't worth acknowledging. That was the moment I started paying attention, really paying attention, to the phone calls Brandon thought I couldn't hear, to the casual lies he told so effortlessly, to the way Vera's family looked at me like I was some kind of charity case they were graciously tolerating. I started keeping track of the money, of the promises, of the disrespect. I had no idea how useful that information would become. By November 2024, the financial ledger told a clear story. Over 5 years, I'd given Brandon $187,412. Not loans, gifts. Because every time I asked about repayment, there was another crisis, Another reason why this wasn't the right time. "Dad, you know I'm good for it," he'd say. "It's just that with Vera's gallery expansion and the mortgage rates and my firm's restructuring, always something. But money wasn't the real issue. I could afford it. 35 years of steady work, smart investments, living below my means. I wasn't hurting financially. The real cost was watching my relationship with my son deteriorate into a transaction. I was becoming the family ATM, needed when convenient, hidden when inconvenient. And it was getting worse. 3 months ago, Brandon started bringing Vera's friends to family dinners at my house. Nice enough people, but I could see how they looked around my modest ranch home in Norwalk. The kind of looks that catalog and judge. My furniture wasn't antique enough. My art wasn't original enough. My dinner conversation wasn't sophisticated enough. During one of these dinners, Vera's friend Stephanie made an observation. "It's so sweet how you've maintained this authentic blue-collar aesthetic, Mr. Thompson. Very unpretentious. Authentic blue-collar aesthetic. Like my life was a theme restaurant." Brandon laughed along. "Dad's always been practical about his living situation, not home. Not the place where I raised him after his mother died. Living situation. That's when I realized what I was really losing. My grandchildren, whenever Brandon and Vera had them, would learn to be ashamed of me too. They'd grow up thinking Grandpa Jim was the family embarrassment, the one you tolerate but don't talk about. The pattern was accelerating. Brandon's lies were getting more elaborate. He'd created an entire fictional version of my career, complete with made-up consulting clients and imaginary corporate achievements. He'd coached me on what to say at social events, like I was an actor learning my lines. "Remember, Dad, if anyone asks about work, you're semi-retired from facilities management. You did corporate real estate consulting. Nothing too specific." I was becoming a stranger in my own family story. The breaking point came 3 weeks before Thanksgiving. Brandon called with his biggest request yet. "Dad, I need your help. My firm is going through a rough patch, and I might need to bridge some cash flow issues. Nothing permanent, just until we get through year-end." "How much, Brandon?" $85,000. The number hung in the air. $85,000. More than many people make in a year. "That's a lot of money, son." "I know. But this could save my career. If I can't make payroll next month, I'm done. Vera doesn't know how bad things are, and her family... Dad, if they find out I'm struggling financially, it'll destroy everything I've built with them." There it was. The truth underneath all the lies. Brandon wasn't just ashamed of my blue-collar background. He was terrified that his own financial struggles would expose him as something less than the success story he'd presented to Vera's family. "What kind of timeline are we talking about?" I asked. 2 weeks max. My bonus comes through in December, and I can pay you back in full." I'd heard variations of this promise before. "Brandon, I need to ask you something, and I want a straight answer. When was the last time you told Vera's family the truth about anything? About my work, about your money problems, about where this cash is really coming from?" Silence on the other end. "Dad, you don't understand their world. These people judge everything. Your job, your house, your car, your family background. I've worked too hard to fit in to let... To let what? To let your father ruin it? That's not what I meant." But we both knew it was exactly what he meant. I made the transfer that afternoon. $85,412. I included a memo. Business loan, B. Thompson. As I watched the numbers disappear from my account, I made myself a promise. This was the last time. Whatever happened next, I was done being Brandon's silent ATM and his secret shame. I had no idea how quickly that promise would be tested, or how much it would cost my son when I finally decided to stop playing his game. Thanksgiving dinner was set for 6 o'clock Thursday evening at Brandon and Vera's house in Greenwich. I arrived at 5:30, carrying a bottle of wine and what I thought were reasonable expectations for a family meal. The house looked perfect, as always. Fresh flowers, gleaming hardwood, the kind of casual elegance that costs serious money to maintain. Vera greeted me at the door with her usual polite smile. "Jim, so wonderful to see you. Brandon's just finishing up in the kitchen." In the kitchen, Brandon was arranging garnishes on plates with the focused intensity of a surgeon. Professional catering, obviously, but he was playing chef for the family narrative. "Hey, Dad, glad you could make it." "Glad I could make it." To my son's house. For Thanksgiving. "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "How are things at work? Feeling better about the cash flow situation?" Brandon's hands stilled on the plate. "We should probably focus on family time tonight, Dad. Work talk can wait. The message was clear, not in front of Vera. Dinner went smoothly, at least on the surface. Vera's parents, Charles and Calantha Pemberton, held court from opposite ends of the table. They were polite to me, asking about my health, my plans for the holidays, my thoughts on the unseasonably warm weather. Safe topics. Nothing that might accidentally reveal who I really was. But I noticed things. The way Brandon redirected conversation whenever anyone asked about my background. The way Vera changed the subject when her mother mentioned their family's upcoming property tax assessment. The way everyone's wine glasses stayed full except mine. Apparently, I was driving myself home tonight. After dinner, Brandon suggested we move to the living room for coffee and dessert. That's when he handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Just some paperwork? Nothing urgent?" I almost put it in my jacket pocket unopened. Almost. But something about Brandon's tone, the way he wasn't quite meeting my eyes, made me curious. I opened it right there. At the top of the page, in crisp corporate letterhead, "Invoice, Thompson Family Thanksgiving Dinner." I read it twice to make sure I was seeing correctly. Turkey dinner, premium organic. $280 wine service, 4 bottles. $320 side dishes, seasonal vegetables. $180 dessert course, artisanal. $150 table service and cleanup. $240 gratuity, 20%. $234 service charge, $196. Administrative fee, $200. Total, $1,800. Payment due upon receipt. At the bottom, in Brandon's handwriting, "Thanks for understanding, Dad. Hope you enjoyed the meal." The room went quiet. I realized everyone was watching me. "Is this a joke?" I asked. Brandon's voice was steady, rehearsed. "Dad, hosting Thanksgiving isn't cheap. Vera and I discussed it, and we thought it would be fair for everyone to contribute." "Everyone?" "Well, Charles and Calantha brought the flowers and wine." You brought yourself." Vera jumped in. "Jim, we completely understand if it's outside your budget. We know retirement can be tight." Retirement budget. Like I was some fixed-income senior citizen scraping by on Social Security. I looked around the room. Charles was studying his coffee cup. Calantha was checking her phone. Vera looked sympathetic but firm. Brandon looked like he was waiting for me to thank him for the privilege of being charged $1,800 for turkey dinner. "Let me understand this," I said slowly. "You invited me for Thanksgiving dinner, and now you're billing me for it? It's not personal, Dad. It's just practical. These kinds of dinners cost money, and we thought—" "You thought what? That I should pay for the pleasure of eating with my own family?" Brandon's voice got an edge. "Dad, you know how expensive things are these days. The catering alone was—" "You catered Thanksgiving dinner? Vera's been working 12-hour days at the gallery. We don't have time to cook a full traditional meal." I set the invoice on the coffee table. "So let me get this straight. You catered a family dinner, invited me as your guest, and now you want me to pay for it. Plus tip." "It's not about the money," Vera said. "It's about everyone contributing fairly." "Where's Charles and Calantha's invoice?" Uncomfortable silence. "They contributed," Brandon said finally. $200 worth of flowers? Dad, you're making this harder than it needs to be." I stood up. "You're right. It doesn't need to be hard at all." I pulled out my checkbook, the same checkbook I'd used to write Brandon an $85,000 check 3 days earlier. I wrote carefully, making sure the numbers were clear. "There," I said, tearing off the check and placing it next to the invoice. $1,800 for dinner. With my family. Brandon picked up the check, looking relieved. "Dad, I really appreciate—" "I'm not finished." The room went dead quiet. "I have a question for everyone. How much do you think it costs to raise a child from birth to college graduation?" No one answered. "The USDA estimates about $300,000. Harvard MBA program? Another $200,000. Setting up a young professional in New York? Probably another $100,000 in family support over the years." I looked directly at Brandon. "I figure I've invested about $600,000 in your life. Should I send you an invoice?" Brandon's face went pale. "Dad, that's completely different." "Is it? Because 3 days ago you asked me for $85,000 to save your career. Today you're charging me for turkey dinner. I'm starting to see a pattern." Vera was staring at her husband. "What $85,000? Brandon looked like he'd been punched. "Vera, that's business stuff. Nothing to worry about." "Business stuff? Jim gave you $85,000? The holiday spirit was officially dead. I picked up my jacket. "Thank you for dinner. It was delicious." Worth every penny, apparently. As I walked to the door, I heard Brandon behind me. Dad, wait. We should talk about this. I turned back. We should, but not tonight. Tonight I'm going home to think about whether I want to keep being your family's ATM, or if maybe it's time for you to learn what things actually cost. I left them sitting there, probably trying to figure out how to explain to Vera's parents why Thanksgiving dinner had turned into a billing dispute. But I wasn't angry, not yet. I was curious. The drive home gave me time to think. $1,800 for Thanksgiving dinner. After an $85,000 bailout. The math wasn't just wrong, it was insulting. But what bothered me most wasn't the money. It was the casualness of it. The assumption that I'd just pay up and say thank you. The complete lack of awareness that asking your father to pay for family dinner might be crossing a line. When I got home, I poured myself a scotch and sat in my kitchen, staring at the invoice. Someone had put real effort into this. Professional letterhead, itemized charges, calculated gratuity. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was planned. My phone rang around 10:30. Brandon. Dad, I think there was a misunderstanding tonight. Was there? The invoice thing. Vera's idea. She's very organized about finances, and she thought it would be more fair if everyone contributed equally. Everyone except her parents. Their family. I let that hang in the air for a moment. And what am I, Brandon? You know what I mean. But I was beginning to think I didn't know what he meant at all. Son, let me ask you something. Do you respect me? Of course I respect you. Do you respect what I do for a living? Silence. Dad, this isn't about respect. It's about fitting in. Vera's world is complicated. These people have expectations. What expectations? Success, status, the right kind of background. And I don't have the right kind of background. You have a great background. It's just different. Different. The word hung between us like a diagnosis. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen until midnight, thinking about the last 5 years, the loans that became gifts, the lies about my career, the gradual transformation of our relationship from father and son to creditor and debtor. But mostly, I thought about what Brandon had said. These people have expectations. Which people? Vera's family? His colleagues? The social circle he'd worked so hard to join? I was still thinking about it Friday morning when my phone rang. Unknown number, but the caller ID showed Pemberton Management Group. Interesting. Mr. Thompson? This is Sarah Martinez from Pemberton Management. We handle property maintenance for the Pemberton family estates. We have a situation at the Greenwich property that requires immediate attention. I think you have the wrong number. Aren't you Thompson Property Services? I'm Jim Thompson, but I don't... Oh, Mr. Thompson, I'm so sorry. Let me check my files. Yes, here it is. You're listed as the primary contact for the Greenwich Colonial. The tenants are reporting a heating issue, and with the cold snap coming this weekend. Tenants. She said tenants. Ma'am, I think there's been a confusion. Which property are we talking about? She gave me an address. I knew that address. I'd been there for Thanksgiving dinner 12 hours earlier. The Pembertons are tenants? I asked carefully. Yes, sir. The lease runs through next spring. Should I schedule the heating repair through your usual contractor, or would you prefer to handle it directly? I was quiet for so long she asked if I was still there. Mr. Thompson, the heating issue is pretty urgent. The tenants are concerned about the weekend weather forecast. I'll handle it personally. Give me a few hours. After I hung up, I walked to my home office and opened the file cabinet I hadn't looked at in months. Property documents, rental agreements, investment portfolios, all the paperwork from the business I'd built alongside Thompson Plumbing. I pulled out a folder marked Greenwich Properties and spread the contents across my desk. 3 properties, all purchased between 2016 and 2019, all prime Connecticut real estate, all managed by the same property management company, the Greenwich Colonial, the house where Brandon and Vera lived, the house where I'd just been charged $1,800 for dinner. According to my records, the lease was in the name of Charles and Calantha Pemberton. Vera's parents weren't just old Connecticut money. They were my tenants. Saturday afternoon, I drove to Greenwich with my heating repair kit and a head full of questions. The Pemberton house sat on 2 acres of perfectly landscaped property. Georgian colonial, probably built in the 1920s, the kind of place that screams generational wealth. I'd bought it as an investment 3 years ago when the previous owners needed to sell quickly for an estate settlement. I'd never met my tenants face to face. Property management handled everything. Screening, leases, maintenance requests. I was just a name on a deed, collecting rental income through direct deposit. But now, looking at the house where I'd been humiliated 12 hours earlier, I was starting to understand the scope of Brandon's deception. I rang the doorbell. Charles Pemberton answered, looking confused. "Jim, what are you doing here?" "Heating repair," I said, holding up my toolbox. "I understand you're having some issues." "You're here to fix our heating?" Behind him, I could hear voices. Calantha was talking to someone in the living room. Then I heard Brandon's laugh. "Is that a problem?" I asked. Charles looked uncomfortable. "No, it's just... I didn't realize you did that kind of work." "Right. Because according to Brandon's version of reality, I was a retired corporate consultant, not someone who actually fixed things for a living." "Where's the unit?" I asked. "Basement," Charles said, stepping aside. "But Jim, maybe we should call a proper technician. This seems like something you shouldn't have to worry about." Proper technician. Like I wasn't qualified to work on the heating system of a house I owned. In the living room, I could see Calantha serving coffee to Brandon and Vera. They were having what looked like an important family conversation, probably about last night's dinner disaster. Brandon spotted me through the doorway. "Dad, what are you doing here?" "Fixing the heat." "You don't need to do that, Charles. I'm sure there are professionals." "I am a professional," I said quietly. The conversation in the living room stopped. Vera appeared behind Brandon, looking puzzled. "Jim, you really don't need to trouble yourself with manual labor," Calantha said. "We can certainly afford to hire proper help." Proper help. There it was again. I set my toolbox down in the hallway. "Mrs. Pemberton, can I ask you something? How long have you lived in this house?" 8 years this Christmas." "Why?" "Beautiful property. Must be expensive to maintain." "Well, yes, but that's what you expect with a house of this caliber." Brandon was shooting me warning looks, but I ignored him. "Who owns it?" I asked casually. Calantha looked confused. "Owns it? Well, we lease it, obviously. The monthly rent is quite reasonable for a property of this quality. 12,000 a month," Charles added. "Below market rate, actually. We've been very fortunate with our landlord." "Fortunate how?" "Never raises the rent. Very understanding about maintenance issues. Never intrusive. We've never even met him, actually. Everything goes through the management company." Brandon's face was turning pale. "Dad, maybe we should let them handle the heating issue." "Who's your landlord?" I asked Calantha. "Some local businessman. Thompson something. Thompson Properties, I think." The room went dead quiet. Vera was staring at her husband. "Thompson Properties?" "Dad," Brandon said quietly, "we should go." But I wasn't going anywhere. "Mrs. Pemberton," I said, "I'm Jim Thompson. I own this house." The silence stretched out like a held breath. Calantha looked from me to Brandon to Vera. "I'm sorry, what?" "I own this house. I bought it 3 years ago as an investment property. You've been paying rent to my property management company since 2016. Charles sat down heavily in his chair. "You're our landlord?" "I'm your landlord." Vera was staring at Brandon like she'd never seen him before. "You knew about this?" "Vera, I can explain. Did you know your father owns our family's house?" Brandon looked like he wanted to disappear. "It's complicated." "How is it complicated?" Calantha's voice was rising. "Jim owns our house, and you've been letting us treat him like the help," I finished quietly. The room exploded into conversation. Vera demanding explanations from Brandon. Calantha apologizing profusely to me. Charles calculating how much rent money they'd paid to the man they'd been patronizing for years. "Wait," Vera said suddenly. "If you own this house, then you know about our financial situation." She was right. I knew exactly what Charles and Calantha could afford because I'd approved their lease application. I knew their income, their credit history, their employment status. I knew they were living paycheck to paycheck, maintaining the appearance of wealth on a carefully constructed foundation of debt and strategic financial management, just like Brandon. "Your father," I said to Vera, "has been an excellent tenant, always pays on time, takes good care of the property." "How much do you know?" Charles asked quietly. "I know your lease is up for renewal in March. I know your daughter's art gallery has been struggling. I know you've been hoping I'd agree to another below-market rate lease renewal." Calantha was staring at her hands. "Jim, we had no idea. Brandon told us you were in some kind of consulting business." "I was in consulting," I said. "I consulted people on where their water went when they flushed their toilets." No one laughed. Brandon tried one last time. "Dad, please. We can discuss this privately." "Why privately? Aren't these people family now?" Don't they deserve to know the truth about where they live, who they pay rent to, what kind of man I really am? Vera was looking at Brandon like she was seeing him for the first time. What else have you lied about? I haven't lied about anything. I just presented things in a way that would be easier for everyone to understand. Easier for who? Vera's voice was ice cold. For all of us. Dad, you have to understand. These people come from a different world. They have different expectations. What expectations? Calantha asked. What exactly did you tell us about your father? Brandon looked trapped. I told you he was successful. He is successful. You told us he was a corporate executive, Charles said. You told us he was semi-retired from facilities management. That's not technically a lie. It's not technically the truth either, I said. I picked up my toolbox. I'll check the heating unit now. Don't want my tenants to be uncomfortable. As I headed toward the basement, I heard Vera behind me. Your tenants? Brandon, what else don't I know about your family? The heating unit needed a simple part replacement. 20-minute job, maybe 30 if you took your time. But I took my time. I listened to the conversation upstairs. Raised voices, heated whispers, the sound of a family meeting that was going very badly for my son. When I came back upstairs, the living room looked like a crime scene. Vera was sitting alone on the sofa, staring at nothing. Calantha was in the kitchen, making what sounded like a very strong drink. Charles was on the phone, probably with their financial advisor. Brandon was nowhere to be seen. He left, Vera said without looking up. Said he needed to think. I nodded. Heating's fixed. Simple part replacement. Should be good for the winter. Jim, Vera said quietly, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. We all do. We've been treating you like... God, I can't even say it. Like someone beneath your social class. She winced. Yes. The thing is, Vera, I don't mind being judged for who I am. I mind being lied about. She looked up at me finally. How much of what Brandon told us about you was true? The part about me loving my son. Everything else was fiction. I left them there to sort through the wreckage of their assumptions. But I wasn't done. Not yet. Because I was starting to realize that this went deeper than just one family's prejudices. This was about something bigger. Something that would require a bigger response. Sunday morning, I got a call from Vera. Jim, we need to talk. All of us. Can you come over this afternoon? When I arrived at 2 o'clock, the atmosphere was completely different. No more polite condescension, no more careful topic management. Vera's parents looked like they'd been awake all night, and Vera herself seemed to have aged 5 years since yesterday. Brandon was there, sitting in the corner like a defendant waiting for sentencing. Jim, Charles said as soon as I walked in, we owe you a massive apology. Already said that's not necessary. Yes, it is, Calantha interrupted. What we've done, how we've treated you, it's inexcusable. Vera gestured for me to sit down. We've been talking all night, about the lies, about our behavior, about what kind of people we've become. I looked at Brandon. He hadn't said a word yet. The thing is, Vera continued, we're starting to realize we don't actually know anything true about you. Brandon's been feeding us stories for 3 years, and apparently none of them were real. Some were real, Brandon said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken. Which parts? Vera asked. The corporate consulting, the facilities management, the semi-retirement. Brandon didn't answer. I set my coffee cup down. You want to know the truth? All of it? Yes, Vera said. Please. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I'm worth $3.2 million. The room went dead quiet. I own 7 properties in Connecticut, including this house. I own Thompson Plumbing outright. No debt, no partners. I employ 12 people full-time, 8 part-time. My business has contracts with half the commercial buildings in Norwalk and Bridgeport. Charles was staring at me. 3.2 million? Give or take, depends on the real estate market. Calantha looked confused. But you're a plumber. I'm a businessman who started as a plumber. Big difference. I stood up and walked to the window overlooking their perfectly manicured lawn. My lawn, technically. You want to know what's really funny about this whole situation? You've been paying below market rent for 8 years because I like the idea of helping a nice family stay in a beautiful house they couldn't quite afford. I never raised your rent because I didn't need the money, and I figured stable tenants were worth more than maximum profit. Vera was doing math in her head. Below market by how much? About $2,000 a month. You've saved roughly $200,000 over 8 years because I was feeling generous. The number hung in the air like an accusation. So when Brandon started telling me about Vera's wonderful family, about these successful, established people he was so eager to impress, I thought it was sweet. My son had found good people who appreciated him. I turned back to face them. What I didn't realize was that the same people I was quietly helping were looking down on me for not being successful enough to deserve their respect. Brandon finally spoke up. Dad, what's not fair about it? That I didn't advertise my net worth? That I preferred to let my work speak for itself? You don't understand the pressure I was under. What pressure? To fit in, to belong. These people expect certain things. These people are sitting right here, Brandon. Maybe ask them what they actually expect. Vera was staring at her husband. What I expected was honesty. What I expected was a man who was proud of his family, not ashamed of them. I'm not ashamed. You charged your father $1,800 for Thanksgiving dinner. Vera's voice cracked. After he gave you $85,000 to save your career. Charles looked like he'd been punched. $85,000? 3 days before Thanksgiving, I said. Brandon called in a panic. His firm was having cash flow problems. He needed money to make payroll. Is that true? Calantha asked Brandon. Brandon nodded miserably. So you took $85,000 from your father, then charged him for dinner. It wasn't like that. What was it like? Vera demanded. I sat back down. I can tell you what it was like from my perspective. It was like watching my son turn into someone I didn't recognize, someone who treated family like a business transaction. But I always intended to pay you back. With what money, Brandon? Your salary barely covers your mortgage and Vera's gallery expenses. I've seen your financial projections. You've been living beyond your means for years. Vera went pale. You've seen our financial projections? Landlord privilege. I know what my tenants can afford. The implications were sinking in. If I knew Charles and Calantha's real financial situation, I knew Vera's family wasn't the established wealth Brandon had claimed. They were middle-class people maintaining an upper-class facade, just like Brandon himself. How long have you known? Vera asked quietly. About your family's finances? Since I approved their lease application? About Brandon's lies? Since yesterday? Calantha was crying now. Jim, I don't know how to apologize for what we've put you through. You don't need to apologize for believing what you were told. You need to apologize for how you treated me even when you thought I was just a working-class guy who didn't deserve your respect. The truth of that hit them like a physical blow. We're not actually wealthy, are we? Vera said, more to herself than anyone else. Define wealthy, I said. You're not poor, but you're not the Connecticut elite Brandon wanted you to be either. Brandon looked up from his hands. I just wanted to belong somewhere. I wanted to be the kind of man who deserved someone like Vera. By lying about your father? By not letting my background limit my future? I shook my head. Your background didn't limit anything, Brandon. Your shame did. Vera was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. What happens now? I looked around the room. At my tenants, at my daughter-in-law, at my son who'd built his entire adult identity on a foundation of lies. Now we tell the truth, I said. All of it. I gave them a week to process everything. The following Sunday I called a family meeting. This time at my house in Norwalk. If we were going to rebuild relationships on honest ground, it needed to start in a place where nobody could pretend to be something they weren't. Vera and Brandon arrived first, followed by Charles and Calantha. My modest ranch house suddenly felt very small with 5 guilty people sitting in my living room. I've been thinking about our situation, I began, and I've made some decisions. Brandon tensed. Dad, let me finish. First, the money. The $187,000 I've given you over the years? Consider it a gift. You don't owe me anything. Relief flooded Brandon's face. But, I continued, the $85,000 from last week comes with conditions. What conditions? I pulled out a folder I'd prepared. You're going to pay it back. Not to me, to yourself. I'm setting up a savings account in your name. You'll deposit $1,500 every month until it's paid back. No exceptions, no emergencies, no excuses. Dad, I don't understand. You need to learn what money costs, son, not just to earn it, but to value it. When you can write yourself an $85,000 check from money you saved, you'll understand why charging your father for dinner was wrong. Vera nodded slowly. That's fair. Second, I said, turning to Charles and Calantha, your lease. They both went pale. I'm raising your rent to market rate. Effective January 1st, You'll pay $14,000 a month instead of 12. Calantha started to speak, but I held up my hand. However, I'm also offering you a lease-to-own option. You've been good tenants. If you want to buy the house, I'll sell it to you at a fair price with owner financing. No bank approval needed. Charles looked stunned. You'd sell us our house? It was never really your house, but it could be. How much? Calantha asked quietly. $4.6 million. I'll carry the mortgage at 4% interest. Your monthly payments would be about $18,000, but you'd be building equity instead of just paying rent. Vera was doing math again. That's incredibly generous. It's business. Good tenants who take care of a property are valuable. I'd rather sell to people I trust than deal with the open market. We'll need to think about it, Charles said. Take your time. The offer stands. I turned to Vera. Your gallery. What about it? I looked at your business plan. You're undercapitalized and overextended. You need either more inventory investment or lower overhead costs. Vera looked embarrassed. We've been struggling. I know. That's why I'm offering to help. I'll lease you a space in downtown Norwalk at cost. Half the rent you're paying in Soho. Better parking. Growing arts community. Why would you do that? Because you're family. Because good businesses deserve support. Because I believe in investing in people who work hard. Brandon was staring at me. Dad, after everything I've done, after everything you've done, you're still my son. But you're going to learn to be a man I can be proud of. How? I pulled out another document. You're going to work for me. What? Weekends. Thompson Plumbing needs someone to handle administrative work, customer relations, business development. You'll learn the business from the ground up. Dad, I'm an investment banker. Who needed his father to bail him out? Clearly investment banking isn't working out. Vera touched Brandon's arm. It might be good for you. The pay is $15 an hour to start, I continued. You'll work Saturdays and Sundays. You'll wear work clothes, carry tools, and learn what it actually costs to build something real. Brandon looked like I'd asked him to join the circus. What if I say no? Then you say no. But the $1,500 a month still goes into savings, and you figure out your own path to financial responsibility. The room was quiet for a long time. Finally, Brandon spoke. When do I start? Next Saturday, 7 a.m. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, returning with a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. One more thing, I said, opening the bottle. From now on, family dinners are at my house. I'll cook, you'll help clean up, and nobody gets charged for anything except bringing an honest conversation. Calantha started crying again. Jim, you're being far too kind to us. I'm being exactly as kind as family deserves, which, it turns out, is pretty kind. I poured 5 glasses of wine and handed them around. A toast, I said, raising my glass. To honest work, honest relationships, and second chances. To family, Vera added. To learning what things actually cost, Brandon said quietly. We drank, and for the first time in years it felt like we were actually family. Not the fake version Brandon had constructed for social acceptance. Not the image Charles and Calantha had been projecting to maintain their status. Just 5 people who'd learned the hard way that respect can't be bought, borrowed, or faked. It has to be earned. The changes started immediately. Brandon showed up that first Saturday morning looking like he was attending his own execution. Work boots, jeans, and a Thompson Plumbing t-shirt that hung on him like a costume. Morning, boss, he said with forced cheerfulness. Morning, employee, I replied. I started him on inventory management, cataloging parts, updating supplier databases, organizing the warehouse. Simple work, but it required attention to detail and respect for the tools and materials that built other people's lives. The first day was brutal for him, not physically. The work wasn't that demanding. But psychologically, watching his Harvard MBA son learn to appreciate the value of pipe wrenches and joint compound was like watching someone rebuild their entire identity from the ground up. This is harder than I thought, he admitted during lunch break. What part? Caring about whether we have enough 3/4-inch copper elbows in stock. Why is that hard? Because if we run out on Tuesday, Mrs. Rodriguez doesn't have hot water for her kids' baths. It matters to real people in real ways. He was starting to get it. By the 3rd weekend, Brandon was asking questions about business operations, cash flow, customer relationships, employee management, not from his MBA theoretical perspective, but from the practical angle of someone who was beginning to understand that successful businesses solve actual problems for actual people. Dad, how did you transition from plumbing service calls to property investment? Slowly. one good decision at a time. When I fixed someone's plumbing, I'd notice whether their house was well maintained, whether the neighborhood was improving, whether the owner was treating the property as an investment or just a place to live. So you were doing market analysis without realizing it? I was paying attention. Different thing. Vera's gallery move happened in February. The Norwalk space was smaller than her Soho location, but the lower overhead allowed her to take more risks with emerging artists. Within 2 months, she was breaking even for the first time in 2 years. It turns out, she told me over Sunday dinner, I was spending so much money trying to look successful that I couldn't afford to actually be successful. Charles and Calantha decided to buy their house. The financing took 6 weeks to arrange through my business attorney, but by March, they were homeowners for the first time in 8 years. It's different, owning it, Calantha said during one of our family dinners. I find myself caring about the garden in a way I never did when it was someone else's property. That's what ownership does, I said. It makes you responsible for outcomes instead of just experiences. But the most interesting change was in how people outside our family started treating us. Brandon's colleagues at the investment firm initially made jokes about him spending weekends playing with tools, but when his understanding of small business operations started informing his client recommendations, the jokes stopped. I had a client last week who wanted to invest in a plumbing supply chain, Brandon told me. 6 months ago, I would have just looked at the financial projections. But now I actually understood what they were selling, who their customers were, why their inventory management mattered. Did you recommend the investment? No. Their business model was designed by people who'd never actually fixed a toilet. They had no idea what contractors actually need. Vera's mother called me one afternoon with an unusual request. Jim, I hope this isn't presumptuous, but I have a friend whose son is looking for work. He's a good kid, but he's been struggling to find direction. Would you consider hiring him? What kind of work is he looking for? Honest work. Something that teaches him what real accomplishment feels like. Word was spreading. Not about my net worth. That remained private family business. But about the idea that working with your hands while building something lasting was its own form of success. 3 months after our Thanksgiving disaster, I got a call from the Greenwich Hills Country Club. They wanted to discuss their facility's maintenance contract. We understand you own Thompson Plumbing, the facilities manager said. We're looking for a contractor who understands the importance of discretion and quality service. Discretion. Many of our members prefer to work with business owners rather than just service providers, people who understand their standards. I accepted the contract, not because I needed the money, but because I wanted Brandon to see what respect looked like when it was earned rather than demanded. The first time we serviced a maintenance call at the country club, Brandon came with me as my business development associate. Several members recognized him from social events. Brandon, I didn't know your father's company handled our facilities. Best plumber in Connecticut, Brandon said with what sounded like genuine pride. That afternoon, driving home, Brandon was quiet. Everything okay? I asked. I've been thinking about something. When people find out you're my father now, I feel proud instead of embarrassed. When did that change? When you stopped lying about who I was. It's that simple? Most important things are. 6 months later, we gathered for Thanksgiving again, this time at my house, as promised. Brandon arrived early to help with cooking. Vera brought flowers from her garden. She'd started gardening since moving to a house with actual soil instead of decorative planters. Charles and Calantha came with homemade dessert and stories about their new neighbors. No one mentioned invoices. During dinner, Brandon made an announcement. I've been thinking about making some changes at work, he said. My firm has been asking me to head up a new division focused on small business investment, helping family companies grow without losing their identity. Sounds like a good fit, I said. It would mean less money, at least initially, but it would mean working with businesses I actually understand. Vera reached over and squeezed his hand. We don't need as much money as we thought we did. The gallery's profitable now, she added, and we're buying a house in Norwalk, smaller than Greenwich, but it's ours. Plus, Brandon said with a grin, my weekend job pays $15 an hour now. Performance review coming up, I warned him. Don't get cocky. After dinner, we sat in my living room with coffee and talked about real things. Brandon's plans for the new business division, Vera's upcoming art show featuring local Connecticut artists, Charles and Calantha's decision to join the Norwalk Community Garden, normal family conversation. No careful topic management, no strategic omissions, no performance anxiety about saying the wrong thing. "Dad," Brandon said as they were leaving, "I have something for you." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $1,500. "First payment," he said. 56 more to go. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do. We both know why." I looked at the check. In the memo line he'd written, "Investment in learning what things cost." "See you Saturday morning?" I asked. 7 a.m. sharp. We're installing a new water heater for the Martinelli family. After everyone left, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee and thought about the year that had passed, about the difference between family that costs money and family that creates value, about the fact that respect once lost can be earned back, about how much easier relationships are when everyone tells the truth. If you've ever been underestimated because of what you do for a living, let me know in the comments. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be ashamed of honest work. And remember, family dinners should never come with invoices.